Hi everybody, and welcome to our online baptism class. This series of videos covers the material in our baptism class for all of those who would be looking to be baptized at Crossway or join the church through baptism. My name is Kirk Miller, and I have with me Dan Allen.
Hello.
All right. So we want to, in this video, just cover our introduction, as you see there, which is why take the time to even think about baptism. Why do a class like this? Why attend a class like this?
Yeah, so let's get started with the first question there.
Yeah, go ahead. Read that question.
Why is it important for us to take time to consider the Bible's teaching on baptism? So why even hold a class about it? Why spend, a half hour, hour, 2 hours talking about it?
And why do we require folks to go through this?
Yeah. So we can toss out a couple of reasons. And one passage we'll obviously look at is the Great Commission passage where Jesus commands the disciples to baptize people. He commands his people to, as you go out and make disciples, baptize them. And so we should probably think about okay, so that's what we're supposed to do. We should probably know what we're doing that for, what it means. Mm-hmm. Right? It's just like anything we do, like in the church or any tradition. It's never meant to be just a rote thing you do, just something you do mindlessly.
Yeah, why do we sing songs, or why do we
Lord's
preach,
Supper,
or all those things. We want to know why we're doing, and it's something that's commanded by Scripture. As you're saying in Matthew 28, it's something that Christ commands us to do. We will want to do it because it's a command, but we also want to know why it's a command. We want to be able to appreciate what's going on.
Yeah.
I would say as well is that we oftentimes we find ourselves in contexts where people bring a lot of baggage to baptism. So it may not be that we need to be persuaded that baptism is important or that we ought to do it. We may be agreed on that, but we may not all understand or agree on what it actually means and why it matters. And some views of baptism can be quite different than others. People differ on who should be baptized, whether we should baptize infants who don't yet believe, or whether we should only baptize people when they come to the age where they can actually have their own credible profession of faith. Other people hold to views of baptism where the act of baptism itself actually conveys salvation, they would think, or is at least essential to salvation. And so this actually touches on some of the core doctrines of Christianity, of how we're saved. And so we're dealing with pretty... You might think, well, baptism doesn't seem that significant, but we actually can be dealing with some pretty important matters.
Yeah. I don't want to repeat exactly what you said, but just there was a couple points in there that just to make sure everybody hears it. One is that the fact that there is a lot of views of baptism, right? That's kind of the big umbrella piece. But they're not just simply different views and they're all equal. There are some that we would put in the category as heretical. They actually mess with the gospel. Right, so we want to make sure that we're staying away from that, and coach people away from that, and guard the church. The other piece of that, like you mentioned, is that people bring a lot of baggage to this. So perhaps you will, listening or watching, you'll see that the Scripture seems to teach a different view of baptism than maybe you grew up with, and the temptation at that point is to let our emotions or our family things,
pressures,
to influence what we want the Bible to say. And why baptism is a category that does that just to the extreme, I don't quite know. I think some families can feel like you're going against them to do that.
It feels like a breaking away.
Yeah.
But we do. But we have a lot of pressure and a lot of baggage oftentimes, some of us.
Yes, yeah.
Where we want to, ultimately, what we do with baptism, as with everything, we want to submit it under God in obedience to Him. What should be our driving force, and the decisions we make in life, no less in baptism, should be to honor God and obey His word, regardless of some of those pressures.
Yeah, so that's a good transition into that next piece, the goal of the class.
Let me say one other thing too, is I would say, sort of with the first point we made about knowing why we do something, is I think just ultimately we're the goal of this class is very positively to help us appreciate baptism.
Right, that's a good point.
So we would want not just to persuade you that if you haven't been baptized, to be baptized, or if you haven't been baptized as a believer, to be baptized as a believer. We don't just want to persuade you of that just for the sake of having you go through the motion. But I think God has given us baptism as well as the Lord's Supper and many other things. He's given us these things for our good. He wants us for our faith to be encouraged by these things. And so we want to, obviously, at the end of the day, we want you to be to be able to, if you are to be baptized, we want you to be able to go through that experience, appreciating it to its full, and just gaining the benefit that God intends.
That's a great celebration and joy. And it's not only for the act of when you're baptized, but I mean, from here on out at that point too.
Viewing other people.
Every time the church gathers for a baptism, that's a very celebratory time, and to enjoy that together.
Yeah.
Great. And so, transitioning to the goal of the class is we want to give help clarify the biblical meaning of baptism. And for folks that maybe went through the membership class, we're going to be doing something very similar. When we did the view of God's view of the church and God's vision for the church, basically, we're going to look at a number of passages and together try to build a view of baptism that the Bible gives us. So we're not going to hit every passage where baptism comes up, but we're going to grab a decent enough amount of passages to be able to build a theological view of what baptism is.
Mm-hmm. And then we want to unashamedly encourage those who have not yet received baptism as a believer to do so. That is like you said, there are some differences of baptism where we're talking about the difference between orthodoxy and heterodoxy, where these are significant differences. There are also small differences that we would recognize with other church traditions, other believers, that, we differ on these things. They're not the end of the world, but nonetheless, we unashamedly hold to a believer's baptism view. And if you're coming from a tradition where that's not been your experience, we would want to convince you that that's what Scripture teaches. And so we would want to encourage those who haven't been baptized to do so.
And I guess we could say here that in terms of if you are becoming a member and hold to a different view of baptism, that we agree still falls within orthodoxy, that you can be truly one of the people of God and you're practicing baptism in a way that's not heretical. Say you're like a Presbyterian view of baptizing infants, not that saves a child. We do have material that we do require members to actually go through on that so that they actually can articulate that view, they understand it. We're not going to cover that in this class here.
Yeah.
We're going to try to try to persuade people from the text why we think that this is the way baptism should be practiced. But if you are interested in seeing that other material, don't have it online yet.
But maybe we will.
This is a timeless thing here, but be on the lookout for that, or ask us to go through it with that. We want to equip people with that as well.
All right. So in our next video, we will dig into understanding baptism and look at some of those passages.